I think my whole life is about curiosity. You know, it's interesting as you go through life, you meet people and you discover there's some people that aren't very curious about life or what's on the other side of the street or anything. So I'm lucky, I guess. You know, maybe my parents made me that way. I'm not sure, but just super curious. I used to hate seeing people's photographs that had a long description underneath because there was a lot of kind of pure photography that I was attracted to, and the kind of ethics of pure photography that I fell under the spell of. And it made sense to, kind of like Walker Evans, and, he's kind of very astringent type of people. But I started realizing that all of my photographs, my best ones or my favorite ones, or at least what I was interested in, completely demanded big, long stories. Not just a little caption, but because, like my book, The Climbers, if you just look at it real quick, it looks like a bunch of old men, right? And I've even had people, oh, yeah, I like photographing old men too. They're so interesting with the wrinkles. And it's like, it's not why I'm photographing them. I mean, no, it's not. I'm not a wrinkle fetishist. And so you have to talk about, these people have amazing lives and amazing stories. And so I just found out that, and also not just people, but places I'm very interested in that have some history or story behind them. It just doesn't come out in the photograph. I mean, you can take a good photo of the thing, but, that stupid story, photographs never lie. Well, sometimes they don't even tell anything. They just look nice. So I shoot some abstract kind of stuff. There's a lot of different photography that I like to do, but it does seem like my stuff has been, the curiosity about life has come through the photography and its stories. And I also shoot a lot of these old musicians. Some of them are famous, but a lot of them are not. But they're kind of great, these old rockabilly, guys from the 50s or something. I guess I just want to tell a story that people are like, I didn't know that. And that's interesting. That's all I really want to do. I don't want to make them cry or laugh. I would like to convey my enthusiasm about people, places, and things. I get very enthusiastic about life. I'm like very into music and music history and a lot of my stuff. I mean, it's weird. Some people only know me as the Climbers photographer, but most people knew that I was this kind of crazy music enthusiast who tracked down these older people that had been making music, blues and rock and roll. And I mean, with a lot of these people that I've hung out with, I think knowing about amplifiers and guitars and just being familiar with music, I know it's been a bonus to be able to, relate to these people as opposed to just some guy, oh, you're famous, let me take your picture. There's this great woman, Fran Lebowitz. When I was young and starting to think about New York City and I wanted to live there, and she had written this book called Metropolitan Life in the 1970s. And it was just this very Jewish female hardcore New Yorker attitude, like just layers of attitude, and really funny. She was just like one of the kind of current people. It's like, oh, that's New York. This is part of New York. This is the New York I want to get into. But I just read an interview with her and she was being asked about the pandemic. And of course, she's been in her apartment forever. And they said, what's the thing you miss most about just being out in the city? And she said, happenstance. Just that thing that happens that you can never predict. You think you're going to the store, but then you run into Tom, and then Tom has this friend, and, suddenly you're dating Tom's friend like a week later. That's the way real life used to work. And you forgot about getting milk at the store. Those things don't happen at all. So that, in a broader scale, when you're really traveling, that's what I miss are the accidents, not so much the plan, but the surprises. And the surprises can turn out to be way better than your plan. And when you're cut off from being able to have a surprise, then you really realize how valuable they are. Because I don't think you think about it when you're, oh, this thing happened. But now it's like, well, shit, I know exactly what's happening. I'm going to make the coffee. I'm going to check the mail and hide from the plague. But overall, I've been pretty stubborn. And I think that it has turned out for the better. I think there were a lot of opportunities for me to kind of go the kind of main road, and I probably, would have made more money and probably been more comfortable, especially because I moved around a lot. Just when things were starting to kind of get good, I would take off to another city. Yeah, I think sticking to your guns, if that kind of thing is important to you, does pay off in some way. Well, it's such a weird world now, because everything I like is like happened before me, like music. I was into, even when I was a little boy, I loved 1930s music, 1940s, art, photography. I've always liked this stuff before me. So by the time I started going out into the world, being a modern guy doing work, I was still trying to like live in this 1930s world of travel, photography. I just wanted to exist in this other kind of way. So to me, success just means, I was talking about this to a friend the other day, I think, and I said, it's great to have money, but just to have the ability to keep doing what you do, because it can be cut off so easily, and I know many friends who have just, for whatever reason, stopped doing it, whether it be music or photography. But I'm not young anymore. And I talked to some old friends from the old days, and they're like, God, I can't believe you're still doing it. I never thought about that until people say it. I think it is kind of a luxury to, well, it's not luxury, but, to get enough projects to where you can keep being yourself most of the time, and it keeps you going. I mean, if you're somebody like, Irving Penn or Richard Avedon, those are just so few of those in the world that really get to do what they want. But even then, they're making so much money, they got to keep the machine alive, I got to meet Richard Avedon. He was one of the, like in America, in New York City, just one of the big, he shot fashion and portraiture. Kind of a real major guy. Him and Irving Penn were the two guys in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They just never died, and they kept doing work. But I'm sure, to keep that studio going in New York City, the rent, the assistants, the dark room, it's just, I'm sure you get caught. And it's not a bad place to be caught, shooting for Vogue magazine all the time and going to France. I'm sure he loved it, but I've sort of stayed under the radar in these weird ways, sort of put my toe in the big fancy world, and I've kind of kept it over here doing my personal stuff. Money comes and goes so fast. I've never been that practical, unfortunately, to consider lots of money being the be all end all. I've never really done a big backdrops and big lights, giant sets. Sometimes I think that I wonder if my subjects don't take me seriously, like maybe they think I'm sort of an amateur, because a lot of times I will just come with a little, like a Leica and nothing else for a big album cover shoot. And they'll, I think they're used to something different, come on, baby, give it to me. And I'm just a little more not like that. I don't know. I've been told that I guess I do make people comfortable somehow or something. I don't really know how or why. I just being real with people, I guess. Maybe I'm doing something that I don't realize, but I guess there's a little psychology there. It's not always perfect. I've had some disasters too, but maybe I'm doing something different. I really don't know. I'm afraid to think about it. If I figure it out, I might break it. This was one of my first kind of jobs. It was for a magazine in Los Angeles. I lived in Hollywood, and Peter Murphy was playing at the beautiful Wiltern Theater, old 1920s theater in Los Angeles. So during the day, he was going to make some time for interviews and photographers in the lobby of this old theater. So I was hired by the magazine. They said to go there at, whenever, 12 noon or something. So I went there, and there were other photographers, and it's like, oh, this is kind of stupid. So I walked past this one guy, and he's got these, back in the 80s, they had these canvas backdrops that had these kind of new wave painting on it. Everybody had them except me. They were so shitty. So there was one backdrop, and he had his 2 strobe lights. And I passed him, and then there's another guy with the same ugly ass backdrop, a couple strobe lights, like each guy had the same light set up. And there was like 3 of them. And so the last place for me was kind of at the end of this hallway where this old, kind of beautiful metal stairwell went up. And that was kind of the only place left. And my camera, and they had their 35 millimeter cameras hooked to the strobe with umbrellas. And so my lighting gear was this giant 8x10 camera. Like literally when you open it up, and a light bulb on just a bare wire, because that was my thing for a while, because it looked like some old gangster apartment in New York in the 1930s. It's like, especially those movies, or just that look. When I was young, I used to think, why do these rooms look so cool? And it's like, because they're so poor, all they have is a bare light bulb in the ceiling and nothing else. So it's like, that's the way I'm going to start lighting my stuff. And so I set up my 8x10 camera, this dumb little cord, and the light bulb hanging just droopy on a stand. And I remember Peter Murphy finally coming in, and he's set for the first photographer, and he kept looking at me like, what the hell's this guy? And he did the other photographer and did the other photographer, and then he came down. I wonder if those other photographers were pressured because they knew exactly. They had a very easy camera to focus. I was shooting sheet film, and I had to get this job. And of course, I was young. I wanted to impress the magazine, and I just wanted to do a good job because I had never really done this with this light and this big giant camera. It just seemed like a good idea. I think there is a pressure if you're trying to push the boundaries, I think a good thing to think is sometimes you can get too good and it can make you lazy. If you're too comfortable knowing what you're doing, maybe you should start doing something different. I think you should have a little bit of pressure about things. If it's different between big people, only because of that, if you're getting paid. Or you really won't, like you have one chance with Tom Petty or something. I mean, I didn't. He's not a good one because I did a lot with him. But, you want to make sure you don't mess up an opportunity. But I always felt comfortable around those people. Actually, the only person that made me nervous was Richard Avedon, that photographer. When I met him, he was just such a god in my eyes that I was kind of stupidly shy, to be honest. I was happy. I got it in focus. It's just literally the camera. I mean, you know how cameras work. If the closer you get to focus, you have to increase the distance of the lens away from the film. So, that picture of him is very tight. So this 8x10 camera it looked like an accordion at full, and my arms could barely reach the end of it to focus. I usually don't have a hardcore agenda like that I must be different than other people. I'm just trying to be free, I think. I think that's usually, I'm just trying to not only get out of the way of other people, but get out of the way of myself. I think that's the best way of working. It's also the best way of climbing, the best way of playing guitar, if you can just get out of the way of yourself. I mean, sometimes things are too big. Like the first time I did Dolly Parton, it was just a big deal. There was a lot of people, it's Dolly Parton. She's just, you have to have some things planned But even within that, I mean, this was cool with her because she had been in her previous bunch of album covers, like in the, the 80s and 90s, she started getting these kind of airbrushed butterflies and these kind of fantasy, just too big. So when we met, and she was so cool, she was like the coolest person I've ever met, but she said she really understood my photography. She totally got it and let me do what I want to do. This album was more about her going back to her old mountain roots kind of music. So it kind of fit in that I wasn't going to be doing these fantasy kind of things. It was going to be kind of my black and white. So, we did get this old Cadillac and I found a location, but from there we just kind of let it go. And that's what I like doing. Black and white is something you could always do if you were 13 years old and your mom let you build a little dark room in the downstairs bathroom. It was always going to be black and white because it's cheaper, takes less, color, has all this precision, all these extra steps. So, I think anybody in the world ever that learned to do photography, I would love to know if there was anyone whose first darkroom experience was color. That would be so weird. You would have to be like, your father was a famous color photographer and that's all you had growing up. Otherwise, it's always black and white. And so, when you do that young, you get comfortable with it. And, by the time that I could even afford to, if I've never had a color darkroom, didn't even want one really, just so good at black and white. And it also, I got to be honest, so many people that I liked and movies that I was influenced by, it was just, and maybe even my attitude, it's black and white. But I do love color. I love shooting in color. I've always loved color. I guess, it is, if you really think about when I was just scrambling to learn, it was always black and white darkrooms. I mean, it's a different thing now because kids, they have digital and they have Photoshop or whatever, something like that, whatever it is. Photoshop sounds old fashioned all of a sudden when I say it. Now they're just doing it on their phone. And that's why you see so much, I think, color photography is because you can do it either way. Kids now have that equal opportunity for black and white or color. So, but if you wanted to shoot stuff, if you were kind of a serious photographer, it was black and white because that's what you had the chance to do. It's funny how generational it is, or not even generational, like the first 150 years of photography was such a black and white centric. But I do love it, all the reasons that other people say it, the kind of simplicity and, color can kind of be distracting. I guess so. I mean, I also think, like I say, color is wonderful and beautiful, but it's weird. Sometimes I can sound probably predictable by sticking with black and white so much. You really do start to see the world that way when you shoot so much black and white film and process so much black and white film and making black and white prints that I just don't even think about it. I know how it's going to look. In some ways, I feel like I've never even made it. I still feel like I'm 13 wanting to be a photographer. I came from a small town in North Carolina. I didn't grow up in New York City or something. And this kind of world that I wanted to see and be a part of, and it didn't exist really around, I had to go find it somewhere, which part of that was having to move to Hollywood, New York. Yeah, I do think the challenges remain. Just like any artist, you're as good as what you did yesterday. If you cease to do work that people want to see, then it's over. So it always remains. And to yourself also, like you have to continue to impress yourself and to be excited about things and realize when you're just repeating things because it's easy or for whatever reason. So I don't think the challenges ever go away. I mean, there's a lot of great photographic artists who never really did it, supported themselves with it. There's some kind of legendary people that just never made a dime with it. They did it at night or, who knows what. I feel like I'm trying to do the same stuff, get work. I love being able to pay my rent with photography. So, I've always kind of kept it as it's my art, but it's my career. which has always been kind of difficult, trying to keep my style a certain way and not give in too much to the commercial pull. So that's probably why it's been challenging for me, is just the stubbornness of, trying to shoot a certain way. Never goes away. Photography will always do that thing. It's always going to be here because, if you ask me, what does it look like? I can show you a picture. It's like, oh, that's what it looks like instantly. There's never not going to be that kind of thing. And whether it's a war or what you had for breakfast, you can instantly see what that thing looked like. I mean, what are they saying? There's like 500 billion photographs taken every second now. I mean, actually think about this all day, every day. I remember some photographer, if I wanted to see a Gary Winogrand, who was one of my favorites, I would have to go to the library, and most likely they didn't even have the book, and they would have to get it from another city. So I would wait a week, go back to the library, get the book, and then you get to have it for a week or two at home. And you would, just scan with your eyes, scan like every bit of the book before you had to take it back, and you had to remember it. And that was your Gary Winogrand experience. And you might not have another one, but it was so important. Like I knew who printed the book and what year, I knew everything about it. And now people can just look up on the internet, Gary Winogrand, look at his work. Okay, I get it, and move on. That's cool too. I do that. Amazing to be able to look up anything instantly, but it has to leave you with less of an impact to be able to get something so easy and just say, okay, Gary Winogrand, born, did these, I get it. Next. That can't stay in the brain the same way as sleeping with a book. George Eastman, he's the guy that started Kodak in the 1800s. He developed this camera. For the first time, you could go to the store and buy a camera, and it already had the film in it. And you could come and go into the backyard, take a picture of your wife and your kids, and send the camera back to the people. And they made prints and reloaded the camera with new film and sent it back to you. And before that, you had to be a scientist to take a picture. Every photograph was taken by a high-level scientist because they had to mix the chemicals and understand the complicated cameras. And so that was kind of the first Instagram, or the first iPhone was the Kodak Brownie, the Eastman camera. Any moron could do it. And everybody did. And, and I'm sure a lot of the artists at the time, because that was already 56, that was already 40 years into the invention of photography. And there were already some pretty, hardcore artists. And so I'm sure they saw this new technology get into the hands of every farmer and everything else and wonder, oh, this is the death of photography now. But of course it wasn't at all. I'm basically for it, even, to be able to get cheap cameras into the hands of people in Africa and poor places, and to see what kind of, art comes out of that is really cool. It's just probably going to be the same. There's going to be a lot of shit, as usual, always has been. And there's going to be some cream at the top. I'm not one of these old people that say, oh, you got to do the darkroom work, or I don't believe that. I think you can do art with anything, but it is pretty amazing to go in a darkroom and see a print come up the first time in the chemicals. I think that's one of those things that always, for every person, is, oh, wow. I think that's a cool thing to experience, but I don't think people have to do darkroom work to be an artist at all. Maybe the wonder isn't about the technology. Maybe the wonder should still be about what you're trying to communicate. And maybe that will never change, a piece of glass and something on the other side of it. Hopefully, putting the world in a little square, that's the wow part. I think for any kid, if you give a kid, an 8-year-old, a camera, and he's been living with his mama in his house, and he's seeing the world like this, and suddenly this, it becomes, it's probably a little bit narcissistic, don't you think? Crop marks. crop marks are narcissistic. That's my concept. See how it goes. Because you kind of experience the world before that in a kind of democratic way with everybody else. We're sitting here looking at the sunset, me and mom and dad, and we're looking out the car window. But as soon as you get this ability to make it mine, I'm not showing this thing. I'm cropping it out. So maybe that's the wonder. Crop marks, a frame, I should say, the frame. Well, I don't think I'm changing the world or I'm doing anything. And this is the way I think we all have kind of a responsibility to do this, is just to, look at the world and engage with it and, find what you think is kind of special about it. Nobody can do everything. Leonardo da Vinci couldn't do everything, but everybody finds their thing that they can do and pick out. So in my tiny way, like the climbers, 4,000 of those books were printed. Some of them have probably already ended up in the garbage somewhere in only 3 years. Poured wine on it. Oh, fuck, it's ruined. You don't know, but they're out in the world. And it's a little slice of life about these climbers and about an era that they participated in, that I think we all have a responsibility to be an artist. I think everybody should flex their artistic muscle, even if just a little bit, because that means you're engaging with the world and you're not being a robot. I don't expect everybody to look at the climbers and think it's great, but there will be some people that think it is. And that's kind of cool to connect with people after you die, because I've done that with so many people, artists, and there's people that I feel like I've become friends with, and they were dead before I was born, not just through their art, but then you read interviews with them and it's like, I would have loved this guy or girl. I love what they did. I love their approach to life. So I think it's cool to leave, a little remnant of how curious you were and enthusiastic you were about your life on Earth. This is just a snapshot taken by somebody else of me and Joe Strummer from The Clash. I wasn't living in Los Angeles anymore, but I went there to photograph an album cover for a Russian bluegrass band. And I ended up at this party at a bar, and there's a guy named Tony Brown that plays piano. He used to play with Elvis Presley many years ago. He was at this party, and it was just really crowded. We're all just pressed together. And he goes, Jim, do you know Joe Strummer? And he kind of turned me, and there's right there. And I said, hey, Joe Strummer. So anyway, the party ended, and me and Joe Strummer were at the bar sitting together talking. And I had, done all these old, lived in Nashville, done a lot of these old country singers and country musicians, and he loved those stories. So we're sitting there getting drunk, talking. And I finally asked him, but, what are you doing in town, Joe? He goes, oh, man, you wouldn't believe it. I'm tomorrow going to sing a duet with Johnny fucking Cash at Rick Rubin. That's when Rick Rubin was doing the Johnny Cash recordings. He goes, man, you should come over. I remember saying, you're Joe Strummer, but are you sure you can even invite me over to Johnny Cash? I'd already met Johnny Cash, but anyway, he goes, yeah, man, come over. So the next day I woke up very hungover, and he drew this little map on a piece of paper that looked like a postage stamp. It was 2 lines. Somehow I found it up in the Hollywood Hills, a beautiful old Hollywood actress mansion from the 1920s. And that's where Rick Rubin lives and had a studio. So I went up, buzzed the gate, and I drive around to the back of the building, and there's this garage. And Joe Strummer walks out. Oh, man, you made it. So I walk in. And there's Rick Rubin's Corvette, which you see in this picture, covered with all these pieces of paper. And I said, what you doing, Joe? He goes, well, I'm trying to write a song for Johnny Cash. I already did the singing with him, but I want him to record one of my songs. And I said, oh, cool. So we smoked a joint. We're sitting in there. And he goes, I'm trying to write this song that is about a man like Johnny Cash, but one that Johnny Cash could sing himself. So it's kind of vague about who it's about. He goes, you know all this. You're from the South, Jim. I give me some words. So we're kind of getting high, and I'm thinking of all this kind of Southern terminology, but I give him a line, King Cotton's down the road. He goes, oh, that's good. It's good. And he writes it down. Well, anyway, that's a much longer story, but this is the day he ends up using it in a song. But this was that day. This is in the garage at Rick Rubin's. Spent about 6 hours there. I can't remember who took this picture, maybe Joe Strummer's wife, with my camera. This was when I lived in Tennessee in the 1990s. And it's funny that the Climber book, I had already been working on this. And some of those very first guys I photographed, they died not long afterwards. And so there's a magazine called Outside. It's a good magazine about the outdoors in America, published by Rolling Stone. But they had seen some of my climbing shots. So anyway, they started hiring me sometimes. And they were doing a story on this world famous cave rescue guy that happened to live in Tennessee. And they said, could I go and photograph him? I said, yes. And this was, again, one of these situations. I was so influenced by not only these great artists and people, but my mom and dad had this encyclopedia set when I was young that they probably bought used. So, it was probably like a 1950s encyclopedia. But back then, if you had pictures of things like in the encyclopedia, they're like stock photography they get from somewhere. And so those photos were probably taken in the 40s, and they just get them out of the file for pictures of people or volcanoes or whatever. But I got to tell you, I think I was really influenced by these. They're not really artistic, but the craft is very good. And so like a picture like this, I think is influenced as much by Ouija, the New York crime photographer, street photographer, as much as the encyclopedia. I definitely wanted to go down in the cave with this guy. It's like, I'm not shooting this guy in his kitchen. I want to go in a cave. And so I took a musician friend of mine who lives here. He, doesn't do anything like this. I said, you want to be my assistant? We're going to go down in a cave. So we went to East Tennessee, found this guy. He took us to a secret cave. It's not a tourist cave. It's a cave expert cave. And it's crazy because it's on a hillside and there's just a little metal cover. It's got a lock on it. So unlock it and let us in, crawl in. And then we went like down and down like a mile, way down there. And I had these portable strobes at the time. They were very problematic, but they were great when they worked. So I had two of these strobes. I think I'd seen these kind of in like old 1930s National Geographic. I kind of had this idea of how to shoot this guy. But it was cold. I had my film camera. This guy, as you can see, has a very nice caving suit on. I did not. I had blue jeans and some crappy shirt. And it's pretty cold down there. And then my friend was just around the corner. So he's holding a light. And then I've got a light in the foreground, and that's about it. As a photo, this kind of sucks, right? It's just a snapshot. I love the photo. It's Tom Petty skateboarding, and he's looking very cool, and he is cool. And that's why the picture is cool, because Tom Petty skateboards and seems to skateboard well. I do love the photo, but as a photograph, I'm not very excited about it. It's funny about what's a good photograph. I do love this photo, and that's one reason that I'm excited to be stuck at home during this pandemic is to go through I have so many archives of negatives. You can become very stuck on what you think is good about your work. And that can be informed by various things. I've fallen in and out of love with 35 millimeter Leica. And then I get tired of that. And then it's all about the big, the 8x10 camera. And so sometimes you can get stuck thinking about the craft too much, or, what you think is what you want to be doing. And it's good to have it change often, because it means you're thinking about what you're doing and what photography means. And there's nothing special about the photo as far as art or craft or technique at all. A chimpanzee could have done this photograph, but a chimpanzee did do this photograph. But, it kind of tells you about what photography means, right? People do love this photo. They tell me often. So I guess, sometimes also part of being a photographer is just showing up in life, right? I don't think this looks like any of my other photos as far as what I think I would want people to remember about my photography. It doesn't look like I learned anything about photography. This is just a snapshot. And yet I was out in life to be able to get this. And that's important also. It is a good moment, and I was there for it. You have to sort of allow yourself that. Not always about, some incredible technique-y thing. I mean, I'm not that much of a technique-y guy. I can be, but I don't want my stuff to look like that. Usually my technique is about saving stuff from, bad situations. I used to skateboard like a lot, like really heavily into it when I was in my teens. But funny enough, I moved to California where everybody skateboards back then and kind of stopped doing it. So weird. And I got really, I was really getting into climbing and skiing. But one of the big pros back then when I was young, I mean, he was only like 3 years older than maybe. He seemed like, some wise old man, but he ended up working on photo shoots as a hairstylist. And so we became friends. So just recently, he sent me a skateboard, like his signature model with brand new wheels and like everything. And this is my first skateboard in 35 years, probably. I just skateboarded last week or 2 weeks ago for the first time since the 80s. It's all about that same enthusiasm and curiosity. It's probably annoying to people. I'm sure people like me can be annoying to people, but, I'm overly romantic. The old fashioned definition of that word, and maybe even, melancholy. And I'm probably way too sentimental about stuff, but I think that maybe that helps. And, having a camera allows you to sort of, chase and go after things, things that are pretty, things that are interesting, things that are curious to you. I like having that thing that I can reach out and kind of decipher with the camera. It's like a weird way of making sense of something. I'm a lot more of the latter these days. In the old days, in fact, I have been finding all these old notebooks. I used to sit there the night before, sometimes a photo shoot. Sketching out these. I can't believe I even used to do this, like just doing these drawings, and here's the light, here's the wall, and there's a bar. And sometimes they would just be for an idea of a shoot that wasn't going to happen, just dreaming like, here's a new technique that I've thought up, and here's how you do it before I forget. And that was, I'm sure, very useful in my younger days because, it just required me to think about this stuff that now I take for granted. And I'm good at it now. I know how to, but it was probably in a phase of my life where I wasn't sure. And it was very helpful because I dropped out of school, and moved out to California. I couldn't wait. So maybe I was forcing myself into my own kind of, university. As, I got more into this, like the climbers book and stuff, and I had a pretty crazy, the last 10 years were extremely homeless and vagabond, living in a suitcase. And it was exciting, but it was also very precarious. But it also meant that I couldn't really, I was traveling very light. So usually just 2 cameras, like my old Rolleiflex and my Leica. So, and I was showing up in these places where I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how long I would be there. It just had to be thinking it up as you go. And it was crazy with these old climbers. I mean, sometimes I would appear in some old Italian village with some old man who didn't speak English and I didn't speak Italian, and there's nobody else there. So we can't talk. He's old as shit. He may die any minute or fall asleep. And I'm looking at the wall and the light is disappearing, the sun's setting, and it's just like you're a stranger in someone's home. So there's, your attitude counts. Also, older people expect a little more, sometimes a little more different situation than if this was a 20-year-old I was coming to. Oh, yeah, good. You're trying to be very, proper, but also very human. Also, you're trying not to be a weirdo. You're trying to be someone they can trust. But you're also looking like, what the fuck am I going to do in this place? It's a dump. It's just so, but not in a good way. It's just like impossible. Oh my God. And the lights disappearing. It's really challenging. And again, this guy may die next week, and this is my one chance. And also it's like my last $15 in the world to take this train to this village. So crazy stuff. But that led to some of the best pictures, just showing up like that and not having any kind of plan, because you don't know. There's just no use in making a plan, because this guy may be so old he's not allowed out of his room. Like Ricardo Cassin, he was 100 years old. He died 5 days later, and he couldn't walk. And so basically he was in this room, and the light was bad. But, then I just got this idea to go outside and shoot him through the window. It was so dark in there, and it was just, there wasn't anything good about it. And it was really just a thing to save myself. It's like, oh my God, this guy's very important to me and to the book. And it was really kind of hard to get up to this situation, but it turned out to be the best idea, just going outside. I remember doing that, going outside thinking, well, this is a dumb idea. And it just made it so much better. So I think it's really important to stay flexible and not let your plans be set, because very often you're wrong. People are like, who's the coolest person you met? And they always think I'm going to say Keith Richards or something. It's like Dolly Parton, man. She's just a really amazing woman, funny and smart and professional, loving and nice and friendly. And like, God, she's everything. Sometimes just this feeling I have about stuff like that is so strong that I just wonder if me, Jim Herrington, if I'm an echo off of another life, in a parallel universe, or am I just a blip off of another life? Because it's not just liking old stuff. I don't know. I love this stuff from when I was 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. I loved old movies, old photographs, old stories, older music, and just that was my original feelings about being alive. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why. I mean, I was really into punk rock, which was very modern. I mean, when I was exactly the age to be listening to that when it was happening, and I was totally into it. So, I'm not completely living in another world. Punk rock might have been the only modern thing I ever did. I mean, of course I love, movies that are made now and stuff like that, but I'm just definitely drawn to older stuff. I don't know. I'm an old soul, I guess. I actually want to make a giant print of that I took on a train trip across the USA back in the 80s. Another one of these trips where I had $5 in my pocket, and I was going from California to the East Coast. Well, this was a good story. This was in the early 80s. And when I dropped out of school and I moved to Hollywood, anyway, this guy sold me this car for like $40, like a real absolute piece of shit. Well, I've got a funny story. Bob Hope, actor and comedian. He's actually from England, but he went to America early on, and he became one of the biggest movie stars in America in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. Comedian, radio, TV, movies. Big guy, just legendary guy. But before I bought this car, my friend still owned it, and he worked for Warner Brothers Records in Burbank, and the movie studios are all there. So one day we're driving around in this terrible piece of shit car, and he was driving and I'm in the passenger side. So anyway, he goes, I have to go to the office and pick up something. And so anyway, he pulled in front of the building and he went inside, and I'm sitting there in this terrible car. And it literally looks like it came from outer space. So I'm sitting there, and I just see this yellow golden orb coming down the sidewalk. And it's like reflecting, as California sunshine. It's like reflecting yellow on the buildings, and it's getting closer. And it's Bob Hope in this yellow suit. And at this point, he's very old, but he's just walking by himself. And if you lived in America at any time, you would know who this guy is. He's just one of the biggest. Bob Hope. And he's walking, and he gets right up to the car, and he looks at it. And he looks at me and says, "Were there any other survivors?" Anyway, that's how bad the car was. So anyway, I end up owning the car, and I drive it for a while. But anyway, I think I went back home to North Carolina for a while. And so I drove the car to the Los Angeles train station, the front of it, beautiful train station. I drove it up there, got my suitcase out, I went to the back of the car, and I took the license plate off, put it in my suitcase, and just left the car running. And I got on my train and started going across the USA. I don't know what happened to that car, but somewhere in Arizona, I got on the back of the train and I threw the license plate off into the desert. This is the longest story for one of my favorite photographs, but I guess I took two pictures. So they're side by side, the two negatives. But I'm also shooting through these kind of glass windows so you've got these borders between windows. So it just feels like this continuation of kind of chaotic travel with the desert kind of reflected and seen. I don't know if anybody else likes it. It's just one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. And I still look at it all the time, and it makes me think of travel and movement. So anyway, that's one of my favorite photos. I think I probably have a few favorite photos that nobody's ever even seen or probably would even like if they saw them. I think you have to be a perfectionist. I mean, if you want to be good at it, these things are hard. Playing guitar is hard. Everybody can do 3 chords, but to be Django Reinhardt, you got to be a perfectionist. I mean, anybody can take a picture, but if and that's what I see with, I have young people writing to me, fairly occasionally and ask advice, but I can just tell when I'm talking to them that, they're too lazy. They ain't going to do it. They like the idea that, the lifestyle or being called a photographer or artist, but they don't want to do the hard work. And that's what I tell. It's like if you're willing to like put off fun nights with your friends when they're begging you to come out and you're going to stay in the darkroom instead, that's when you got it. I think that's the difference in all people is that perfectionism and obsessive that draws you to do it. Even when you don't have a boss telling you, it's just you telling yourself that, there's a whole night of really hard, boring work, but I'm going to do it because overall I love the thing. You look at the last century, really it seems like the 20th century was just the highlight of everything. Music, art, architecture, clothing, design, furniture. It's like, is there anything that wasn't at its best in the last century? I wonder if that's going to be kind of a real important part of the history of this world, and if we're all just falling apart. And I look at Trump and this shit, and it's like maybe we've just reached our pinnacle as a race on this planet. And yeah, are we repeating things? But But at the same time, I can be very optimistic with, especially because young people are always the ones that figure it out. And it's all about, what things mean too. It's like things get redefined. And for me to sit here and say, well, has landscape photography been done to death? My opinion is almost useless, because in another generation or two, it's just going to be different. That will be included in how people think about it. That death will be a crucial part, and maybe the best part of the new way that it's thought about. Maybe the just incredible monotony of these images will be exactly what everyone needs to get to this new point that is really good, and maybe the best thing ever. So, things dying, that's not always a bad thing. Some things need to die.